So it was really good to meet you the other night.
Good.
And I was very encouraged by what they reported in the state of public access. I think it looks really good. And I'm really happy that you're here joining us doing your program on public. Welcome aboard, as they say.
Thank you, Harold.
My great good pleasure, and it's your pleasure, my pleasure to welcome you to the program, and your pleasure to have the perceptions during this next hour conversation of Jonathan Piel. Jonathan Piel was the former editor of Scientific American, a major journal of scientific reporting and that sort of thing. We're going to be talking some about that. And he's also, I'm happy to say, a producer, an independent television producer here at Manhattan Neighborhood Network. He's joined. It's a great honor to welcome you to the program, and I thank you very, very much for coming in and sharing this time with us.
It's a pleasure to be here, Harold.
Yeah. Well, now, I wonder if you could, I asked you if you could bear with me a little. I tend to say that we got 58 minutes
Sure.
to talk
Right.
spontaneously and so forth. But could you share just a little bit of your own background? Where you're born and raised, a little educated, and then we could get into a discussion of the human condition and scientific reporting and other matters that might come up. But your own background, born and raised, that sort of thing.
Sure. I'm a native New Yorker. Born here on Manhattan Island. Went to school here. Went away to college. Went to work as a journalist at Newsweek magazine. Before that, I did a stint as a public relations writer at the American Institute of Physics, which used to be here in New York.
Really? Where did you go to college?
I went to Harvard.
Harvard College? You studied Harvard College?
Yes.
You studied literature? What did you study?
I studied European history.
Okay.
And I then went to Newsweek, and from Newsweek I went to Scientific
Out of
American.
Harvard, you went to Newsweek.
Yeah, with a brief stint at the American Institute of Physics as a science writer.
You had written on European history, but you're writing on science, and your life has been involved with science.
Yeah.
You didn't study physics in university,
No.
that sort of thing. And interesting. Yeah.
No, in those days you could get away with being a science journalist without a formal education in science.
George Gamow used to write well, I think, for the public. Yeah.
Yeah, George Gamow did. I think that it was, in a way, a very natural transition because writing about science is writing about one of the major, if not the major, force in human history.
I can understand.
Which is the impact of technology on the economy, on culture, on how people perceive themselves, and of course, out of the technologies of Western Europe, particularly, grew contemporary scientific research.
Yes, I think that's probably all true to say. Yeah, yeah, science.
And so it was not a stretch to go from history to science as a focus of journalistic enterprise.
Yeah. Were you doing intellectual history of Europe or political?
Plain old political
history?
Plain
old, a lot of it, right?
There was a lot of it.
History, right? Mr. Gibbon, I suppose you read and that kind of thing? And
mostly, I was mostly studying the alliances and alignments of the early, middle, late 19th century.
Oh, I see.
European international foreign relations.
Yeah. So you got into some geopolitical stuff and that kind of thinking, and empires and.
Well, I certainly got into seeing how the structure of alliances that the European powers built with and against each other led to absolutely cataclysmic disasters and wars. Sarajevo and certainly before that.
Yeah, right. It had been the whole thing. Yeah.
Which was not an entirely happy-making subject.
Yeah.
So it is also a real pleasure to look at history from the point of view of some of the positive forces that shape it.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Yeah, it's really an interesting thing. You said the science in technology and the extension. Science is a grounding kind of thing that's come out of the light. I guess it's been there for a while, but the scientific method is a really important thing, and the findings and the methods and the disciplines of the scientific approach to life is a very important legacy, I guess, from the classical, but also into the modern experience. And it is you became interested in that?
Yeah, I became interested in it because I think that that history is really, in many ways, very badly taught.
Okay.
Our traditions of historical study are rooted in the nationalisms of the various advanced countries, and in the cultural consciousness of the great Asian societies. It tends to be political, maybe to some extent economic. But what it really, by using that framework, it really eliminates from consideration the fundamental technological drives that have in ways shaped the human animal to be what it is today.
Yeah, absolutely.
Go back to the. If you really want to understand history,
yes,
go back to the Neolithic period and see how hunting-gathering societies adapted to the different climates and geological situations in which they found themselves, and how the technologies that they built through working with stone and other materials built into a snowballing technological advantage in a certain sense over nature. Developed very powerful ways of using nature, both from the point of view of agriculture, of materials, of transportation. So I think that's where the study of history really ought to begin.
Okay, of history. Before that, there's prehistory.
Well, I think that if you really want to understand history, you've got to understand that foundation of our species.
Yeah.
I mean, we didn't just appear on the face of the planet as Europeans wearing
Brooks Brothers suits.
Brooks Brothers suits.
Right. I understand that, and it is really, and it's all really interesting. A little hard to know. Scientific American, if I may, you were editor for a period. We want to get into that by all means, but that's a source of information that has been so valuable to me. I'd like to thank you and all of your colleagues for having made that available to me, because there were articles there that were absolutely just so interesting and so informative and educational that have been very influential in my life. I thank you right at the outset for that. But the questions that come up, if I'm not mistaken, is Scientific American reported on very important things, some of the early mitochondrial DNA research in terms of getting a fix on the beginning of our species on Earth and so forth. I think I saw reports there in Scientific American. But what is your understanding? I wonder if we could, how long does it go that the Homo sapiens sapien is here? There's some argument I've got in my mind. I wonder if
it's about
200,000 years.
That's about right.
Is that sits about right with you?
That's about right. Yes.
And it comes from a tiny gene pool.
Well, no, it doesn't really come from a tiny gene pool.
Oh, okay.
It probably happened throughout the eastern part of
Africa,
of sub-Saharan Africa, the Afar Triangle, and well, one of the interesting articles we did publish on this by a wonderful French researcher named Yves Coppens of the Collège de France tells the story of how the eastern part of the African continent started to sink as a spreading center opened up underneath it and began to drive the land masses that make up Africa apart.
Wow, really? Within the human time frame?
No, this goes back
geologic,
about 6 million years.
Yeah, well, okay, right, okay.
And that produced a flat savanna landscape, whereas the western part of Africa stayed at altitude and became a hot, humid jungle region. Our progenitors were creatures who lived in that savanna, and they had to make a number of adaptations, Coppens believes, and other workers do, in order to survive. One of them was bipedal gait.
We're all bipedal.
Being able to stand up on your hind legs and look out over the top of the grass.
The grass,
to make
it gave
sure
you an
that you're
advantage
not being
against
stalked
the
by
cats.
A large cat, right.
Yeah.
And the opposable thumb, the eyes in the front of the head, these were all features of progenitor creatures, and they were very good adaptive advantages. So this is Coppens' theory of how the human species originated in that region, and he buttresses it through studies of other kinds of animals who are contemporaneous with our ancestors,
Right.
and how different they are from the animals of the rainforest.
Right, yeah.
So that set the stage. That geological event, you were talking about your own background as a geologist and geographer. That geological event set the stage for the emergence of Homo sapiens.
Yeah, and you come to, it's about 200,000 years. That would be roughly 10,000 generations, perhaps. Roughly, if you figure 20 years.
As they say, Harold, you do the arithmetic.
No, I mean,
I
I'm
think
just
you're
guessing.
right.
And just guessing in a layman's way of that. But it's a thing that we got 10,000 generations, and one of the characteristics of Homo sapien is that we are particularly clever at being able to extend our consciousness, if that's right, or our intellectual capability into the environment through the use of, you could use the term science and technology, but science, they often are, we have an Office of Science and Technology Assessment, but extending it and creating an environment. Gordon Childs used to write about man makes the world, and make the world different than in an Eden-like sense seems to be the lot of most of the creatures. Birds make nests, beavers make dams, but we really have the ability to make an environment that is different than in an Eden-like sense is given.
I think that's true. The nest or the beaver dam are small environments. Our species has developed the capacity to transform nature into something that is very habitable for us and that can support large numbers of us. And of course that has been done at some cost to the environment, which opens up another
inconvenient truth. And Mr. Gore would remind us in these days, and
yes,
that kind of thing.
Another inconvenient truth.
Yeah, it is. James Joyce, coming out of literature, and the Vedics, the one thing that's interesting to me is the geography. The Vedics have a view of the world that in a certain sense, at a certain level, it's absolutely true, that all of existence, or everything, life form, everything is a seamless web. It's all one system, and we divide it up reductively into specializations and so forth, but that doesn't take away from the fact that it is one system and that sort of thing. And James Joyce, out of literature, had Daedalus say, history is a nightmare from which I'm attempting to awaken. Do you think the long time on the savannah was a nightmare period, that we were running from the great cats that had great advantages over us until we began to get to the Neolithic where we had control over the food source and so forth? Or is there any way of making a projection what the lot, for that's the vast majority of human tenure on the earth, was probably running away from jaguars and things as prey?
Well,
or what do you think? Or do you get conjecture from your editorial work at Scientific American on that period?
Well, it's kind of an emotional
Maybe.
question.
Yeah.
I guess one would ask, compared to what? It's all that our progenitors knew.
True.
They obviously were intelligent creatures like the other creatures around them.
Yeah. Were they intelligent like us, do you think? The consciousness?
Well, it depends on which ones you're talking about.
Well, let's say we get to Homo sapien. Homo habilis, we got Australopithecine, Homo habilis. We get to Homo sapien. Do you think if you could, some people say if you take a Cro-Magnon and put them in Brooks-Bear of the suit, you wouldn't tell the difference?
You probably not if you gave him a haircut.
A haircut, right, and a shave.
And a shave.
2 bits.
Well,
right.
these days the shave seems to be going somewhat out of fashion.
Yes, more like oh, I see. Okay. Anyway, but you understand what I'm saying.
I like what you were saying, Harold, about the seamless web, because part of our cultural heritage as Europeans seems to be involved in trying to distinguish ourselves from animals or from other animals.
Right.
And it's my personal feeling that it's more of a continuous spectrum than it is a matter of absolute differences. If you look at the phenomenon of intelligence in the, say, the mammalian species, it's very clear that cats and dogs and rats and mice and bovines and ungulates have a capacity to reason and think and see some elementary consequential patterns in the world around them. We have that to a tremendous degree. I guess one might almost say that it's comparable to the properties of a very sophisticated computer program or very sophisticated computer itself. At a certain level, you get what are called emergent properties, which are properties that the designer of the device didn't necessarily see in the plan for what the machine could do.
Synergy?
But in a sense, synergies. But the parts of the machine work together in so many different ways that there are opportunities in it that emerge from its functioning. And I suspect the human brain is probably of the same stripe. It has to be, because we invented computers.
And we invented the computers, and Mr. Kurzweil was on C-SPAN the other day for 3 hours on in-depth, and he's got a book out, The Singularity is Near. He said that's when the computers will exceed human mental capability. And it's moving like it's going. The emperor made the bet with the fellow that said a grain of rice on each thing, exponential movement. I mean, exponential. By the time you get the other side of the chessboard, that doubling is coming in. It's coming now with the computing to where we've got YouTube now, where we can put these programs up and make them available. And that's coming in inexorably, it would seem, unless we do some really stupid thing like blow up the whole world, which is a capability. We've reached such a point where we've been so clever, we got the weapon systems. The Michio Kaku and some other people tell us, and others tell us, that if they were to be unleashed in a Guns N' August kind of spasm of hatred, apparently, I don't know for sure, this is something, this basic datum, apparently we now can know that we can eliminate with our weapon systems the entire species. I don't know if you think that's true or not, or what do you think about that projected idea?
I'm more interested in arguing with Kurzweil for the sake of that. Of course, it's a bit of a taffy pull, because there's no way to prove a negative.
Right.
But that said, I think there is very little danger that the computer, or even, maybe it's not a danger, but maybe it's an opportunity, but I think it's a small probability that the computer could ever do anything like become as powerful as a human mind. The computer is basically an extension of the human mind.
All technology is.
All technology is, as McLuhan would say.
God bless McLuhan.
God bless McLuhan. And it does many things that the human mind does, arguably much better than the human mind. But it is fundamentally stupid, because all it can do is what its program tells it to do. Maybe you could build. I know there's artificial intelligence and
that's what he calls his site,
devices.
Kurzweil AI, artificial intelligence. It's a heck of a site.
And there are computer programs that can beat chess masters.
If I may, Kurzweil, he's an interesting fellow. We did a program with him when his Age of Spiritual Machines. He had written a book called The Age of Intelligent Machines, and he had done a lot of inventing and so forth very successfully. And from 10 years out, Jonathan, he projected, reading the algorithms or something, he projected out within 10 years, within about 2 or 3 months, when Big Blue would defeat the best Kasparov chess champion. Within about 3 months, he projected it by projecting algorithmic, exponentially increasing computing capability. And it's quite a, that's very good from 10 years out, calling it within such a period of time.
Well, the English mathematician Alan Turing, of course.
Turing test is still there for us to
established
pass,
a test that would presumably tell us if a computer if a machine was indistinguishable from a human
That's what he's
mind.
saying. And it's going exponentially. Every time we go on the chessboard thing, it's doubling now.
Well,
it's doubling.
To my mind, it's like the test for whether or not there are flying saucers. I'd have to have one land in my backyard before I believed it, but more power to Kurzweil.
It's really interesting with the extension of the technology. You found, what a place to have been. Did they pay you in order to be the editor of Scientific American?
Yes, it's almost as
I mean, it was amazing. What a job to have been able to have all that come across the transom.
Almost as much fun as being a tennis pro.
Right, all right. But I mean, they have that kind of thing. And now, Michio Kaku, we did a little while ago, and that they got a he has in his book Parallel Worlds about string theory. He was one of the developers with Brian Greene and stuff, but they had this thing And he developed it. He had parallel words that the mathematics of string theory seems to be that there are other universes, parallel universes to this. And he said they've got a telescope now, WHAM or something, and the telescope has been able to take pictures of the shock waves of the Big Bang 13.7 billion years ago, within only 370,000 years after the Big Bang. And he tells me LISA, a system is in place, the financing is there internationally and so forth. They're going to have a telescope by about 2011 that's going to take the measure of the shock wave 1 second of the Big Bang 13.7 million years ago. The consciousness capable of taking the measure of that like that, coming out of evolutionary process in this planet, is indicating maybe a period, a singularity, or, I mean, that's some pretty sophisticated capability that we've developed, don't you think?
It's wonderful.
And it's been over the last 100 years or so, and it's all going exponentially increasing in every field. It's like the pregnancy of a birth or the quickening of a pregnancy or something, and we're coming to a point where we can perhaps destroy the species, and perhaps there's some other things going on the other side that we're losing count of because we're looking at all the trees rather than looking at the forest of the situation that existentially the human society and its technological extension is in. Scientific American is having to bridge a lot of gaps between that, or you're in a position to take a measure of where we stand in terms of what's it all about, questions in universe, or do you understand?
You've raised a number of interesting issues. One of them is how far back toward the birth of the universe can we see, and it's pretty clear that we might be able to see back to within a few fractions of a second, but we can't see beyond that.
Yeah, that's a biggie, isn't it?
Because before that time, the laws of physics, as we are understanding them, simply didn't apply. They emerge from the birth of the universe. This universe.
And they're parallel universes like soap bubbles.
Well, I love that image.
Wormholes.
Andre Linde, Alan Guth, and other cosmologists who developed the picture of universes budding off of each other in an infinite sort of way. And when you go to string theory, there's sort of a parallel theme, which has to do with the geometries in which the basic elements of matter and energy are lodged. They're called membranes. Or brains, and the argument is that the little vibrating strings, quote unquote, that from which all the particles that make up the physical reality around us are made, are anchored at either end in a membrane.
Interesting.
And this membrane has an extremely complicated geometry because there's so many different scales on which matter exists. So that in some sense, the universe is one of these membranes or brains, as the string theorists call them for short. And there's no reason why you can't have a large number of them, like the sets is stored for a theatrical production. The flats,
I see. Right.
Hanging back.
You ever go behind the theater here? It's huge.
Haven't visited this one.
The opera. It's really something to see. I understand.
So yes, it's entirely possible that there are many universes, and quantum theory also provides indications that there are other universes. That being as it may, this is the only one we have, and it's the only planet that we have, and we should be taking better care of it probably than we are. And
couldn't agree with you more, in spades. Because particularly some of the political leadership is very worrying, and lack of vision.
But the worry that you raised earlier about a nuclear conflagration is probably a worry that belongs somewhat more to the Cold War past than it does to the present and the future. But I think that we should not be complacent about that, because it is entirely possible that nuclear weapons could fall into the hands of non-state organizations.
Easily.
And easily, or well, perhaps not easily,
Not easily, but more easily all the time.
Alarmingly growing probability that that could happen. And as long as we live in cultures that are at war with each other, that danger is a very real one that we have to consider.
And you studied European history, the Guns of August, Mr. Tuckman,
the Guns of
and
August,
there was a lot of interlocking alliances that kicked in that they didn't know it was going to do like that.
That's right.
And that's very worrying in a world where we have animosities that are very deep-seated and that sort of thing. And we have, I wonder, if we take that scenario, Mr. Kaku is really here. He worked, I don't know if you know Mr. Kaku, he's brilliant.
No, I don't.
And he's very good physicist. And he was the one who wrote this book, Parallel Worlds. He worked on hyperspace. He works with Green on, he's very good at taking complex scientific ideas and making them available to the layman like myself. And that. Really good at that. He's very good.
Great.
But he's also brilliant. He studied with Teller. And I mean, when he came out brilliant out of Harvard and everything, and he knows those systems well. And he's informed me that the systems, that the destructive capability is such that it could be, because there's other connecting synergies, negative synergies, that could be connected to other systems and so on, that they might be able to even extinguish life on the planet at the hands of our, and we couldn't do that as recently, if I may, Jonathan, we couldn't do that as recently as the Second World War. We were impotent in terms of that kind of Promethean. Does it signal an existential new moment in the evolution of consciousness or something? That we get to a point where we can finally have that Promethean capability, which we haven't had within my lifetime.
I think it calls for a radical change in human consciousness.
I think so. I think it might be we're going to have to do that.
I don't think that with the collapse of the Soviet Union, the danger of a major Dr. Strangelove crisis recedes noticeably, but it's replaced with the danger of ugly little individual uses of these kinds of weapons, which might not trigger. I don't think that's likely.
But what it does, I'm happy to hear that.
But what it does, but the possible future that it does open up for us is a future of comparative misery, in which different human populations are constantly trying to recover from devastating attacks, in which
that involve hydrogen weapons.
That involve fission or even fusion.
I remember that
weapons. Right now, the danger, the danger we're worried about in this country is basically a fission weapon falling into the wrong hands.
You don't think we would ever use it? I can remember Mr. Kissinger wrote.
I don't know.
Well, we've done some strange things, but Mr. Kissinger wrote a book in 1954 on tactical nuclear weapons, and they're talking about bunker-busting tactical nuclear weapons use. I mean, you hear it from Rumsfeld and company, and
the former secretary.
Former, as we talk now. Yes, I undertake note of that and everything. But the thing is, I just wonder. I suppose.
Well, but that's almost like like the dinosaurs trudging off to die. I mean, they're talking about bunker busters and massive nuclear weapons that can be used in a balance of terror situation. But the situations in which you're going to use those weapons are largely gone. I mean, even say looking at North Korea, I don't know to what extent the government looked at the possibility of a preemptive strike, but even a relatively small country like that, one which is presumably quite well watched from orbit and high-flying aircraft and other means of surveillance, we don't have enough confidence or enough information to even consider that kind of an appalling preemptive act.
And and we can't. It's not a scientific theory that can be tested.
No,
Most people
no,
want
this is-
scientific theories
this
that
is
you can
not-
test. You can't do a laboratory. You can do scenarios and things. And
Well, this is no longer science.
Oh, yeah,
This is politics.
yeah,
Various kinds of analytical techniques that are based in political
right.
science. They certainly are affected by technology.
Absolutely.
Because we're talking about how to use the technology.
Yeah. And back again to, it is, after all, there are no disciplines between science and art and politics in reality. It's all a seamless web.
It certainly is in our...
I mean, in reality. We
Well-
divide it up in order for the convenience of being able to understand or take the measure of it.
Well, they are specializations of human
Yes, there are.
activity.
Oh, there is certainly.
A great painter doesn't necessarily know how to take the next step in string theory,
No.
and a string theorist might be a pretty bad musician,
Yeah.
although maybe not, since science and mathematics and music seem quite
They do link.
closely related.
Yeah.
But inside of each of us,
Yeah.
it is certainly a seamless web.
Yeah.
All of these disciplines and human capacities come together has things we can do, ways in which we can act, ways in which we perceive reality and perceive each other. So yes, in that sense, it's very seamless.
I wonder if I could ask another. Matthew Wade, is he writes for the New York? I have to depend upon people that write on these things to get certain layman's ideas of things and everything. But certain things, you hang things on ideas. And he said to me, this is at the biological level, that in the human organism, there's something on the order of 100 trillion cells in a human organism.
Yeah.
Does that ring true to you in your experience as a number?
It's one of those
staggeringly complex.
It's one of those pictorial numbers. Yes.
Yeah.
It is staggering.
And that's I'm more or less correct, because I use that on the air. In far as your experience, that's about it. That's not the life cycle.
No, it's the
So
number
you
of
have-
cells. Well, it might be the number of cells in the human brain.
No, I don't. 10 to the 10th power. How much
10
is
to the
that?
10th
Do you know
power.
your mathematics? That's the human brain, I think. 10 to the 7th power.
It's in just a
But
trillion or more
100 trillion cells in the human organism, and they all matter.
Yeah.
You get one out of whack, and it's called cancer.
Not
And they
one,
all
but-
matter, and they all have oxygen, and they all have the ability to do it. It's a metaphor to Gaia. We got half the population of the world now lives on less than $1 a day or some damn thing. When we have a cave. And the other side of that equation about the destructive scenarios, we have an incredible capability, technologically augmented, of providing what Bucky Fuller or McLuhan might have called life support. We have a
Bucky
capability.
Fuller certainly would have, yes.
Bucky
Yeah.
Fuller certainly would have. He postulated his major
And-
thesis was on that. We have a capability to provide with ephemeralization, doing more with less, but elegance of design, good design. We can take care of everybody and within an ecological context in a manner that has been equally not available to us coming out of history. This may
Yes.
be a time of qualitative transformation in the evolution of affairs and maybe consciousness in this part of universe, and probably Cro-Magnon and cavemen sat around and say, this is really an interesting time looking at a mastodon. But I mean, it really is perhaps now a qualitatively interesting and pregnant
Well, I think,
ending time in terms of the evolution of events in this part of the universe, or is that reaching too far?
I don't think it's reaching too far.
Oh,
I think that the good news is that as human populations adopt industrial economy, the rate at which a population grows suddenly drops to a replacement level. When you reach a certain level of wealth, certain level of productivity in a society.
Yeah.
And the human life expectancy extends from 40 years to 100 years.
Yeah, it's done that in our lifetime.
We are now seeing, as
I don't know,
everybody.
100. It's not 100 on the average.
Well, we have a lot of centenarians.
Yeah, that's
alive in
true.
this
That
country
is
today.
true. Yeah.
And as someone was just saying to me today, 80 is the new 60, which is nice for gaffers like you and me.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to hear that. Yes,
yeah.
indeed. Or Mr.
But-
Kurzweil's written on the fact that you can extend your life. He's written on that thing, too, because they're going to have specific nanotechnologies come, specific systems to attack specific diseases that have been
possible.
aging. Yeah, there's things that are coming, and it's coming exponentially.
But I'm more. I mean, that's exciting, but it's more a greater foundation for optimism
Yeah.
is the so-called demographic transition,
Yeah.
and the fact that we have China and India now emerging as major industrial countries, so that their big populations are going to stabilize. One way, or if you want to be, and I'm fairly optimistic, I think that those societies will both find ways to make sure that the wealth reaches large numbers of people.
We haven't been very good at that in terms of the human condition. We haven't been very good at getting the wealth down to all the people.
Well, I think Western societies have become very good at doing that.
You do, okay.
I mean,
that's
there may be, I'm sure there are poor among us, but even the standard of living of most of the poor people in Western countries is the envy of people living in undeveloped parts of the world.
Well, that's something Karl Marx would have said, that the technology in the capitalist system is incredibly productive. You create an awful lot, so there's a lot there, but there's still a tremendous concentration of wealth.
Well, that's another
capital assets that are creating the wealth is held by a very narrow class of finance people, don't you think, in all economies in the world? Or do you? We don't have economic democracy.
I think the facts are as you say. The facts are also as I'm saying, which is that the Western countries and China and India are increasingly moving into industrial and in the European and American case, post-industrial society, in which the standard of living is very comfortable, certainly compared to those progenitors running around on the East African savannah.
Thank you for that. I agree with you. I think that would have been pretty nasty.
A point of reference.
Yeah, right. Well, if you go back 800 million years, I saw a thing on they have great stuff on television now that's really enlightening. They got animation and things. I saw a thing where they presented an animation on Christmas Day on the Learning Channel. They had an animation of the world with the best paleontologists of 45 million years ago, the mammalians that were evolving, and they had what they looked like, and they animated. It was staggering. And I had the idea, Google is very involved with translating the languages of the world so that you can translate the languages. One of the things they're going to have, you talk on a telephone in English, it'll come out in Swahili. And I had the idea, there were, in that thing of the piece of education, I was transfixed. It was so good. And I had the idea, they could translate that and there wasn't a single written word in the whole presentation, narrative. They could translate that into Swahili, put it in front of kids in Africa. They would be educated at the highest level of understanding of a certain process that took part without going through, education. Or 600 million years ago, they had a thing, fauna was spongiform. It was sponge. There's sponge. All the fauna comes from sponges. And they presented this evidence and that kind of thing, what the world was like 600 million years ago. Staggering stuff that they can do with the media and so forth, and educating things. These are all singularities of the evolutionary wonder of what's evolved on this planet, and that we sit in this universe, that Mr. Sagan is still looking, or Sagan telescopes are still looking, what do they call it, SETI, they're trying to find life, and this is it, we know. And I mean, this is an incredible, that anything exists is a miracle. How anything exists, I don't know. The fact that anything exists is a miracle, and it's a wondrous thing that we're being able to understand it and take the measure of it in a way that is really, makes this a really interesting time.
It wouldn't be interesting if we weren't here to find it interesting.
That's true. I mean, that's true, right on the right.
In a way, you have to turn your argument on its head.
Yeah.
We are inevitable, an inevitable outgrowth of the physical processes in the universe that produced the solar system, produced the galaxy, the solar system, the planet at the right distance from the sun.
And it had to be just calibrated so in order to work. A little bit off here, a little bit off there, it wouldn't have done. We wouldn't be here talking on this television program.
But again, I'd rather look at it as an inevitability rather than as a surprise.
An inevitability. It's not a happenstance, or it's not a chance and necessity, or
came out of the working of physical laws.
Okay, physical laws, not intelligent design or anything like that.
I think intelligent design makes the same mistake of
creation
of presuming that no, not creation. But the intelligent design makes I think the mistake of presuming that complexity has to be the result of invention.
Yeah.
It
Who
doesn't.
invents the inventor?
In fact, everything in the universe indicates that the evolution of matter, biological evolution, are emergent properties of the physical systems, the interaction of energy and matter that makes the universe.
Emerging properties. You used that term earlier. Yeah, yeah. It's a way of understanding it, that kind of thing.
Yes.
I don't know if we have. I don't know. Maybe you have another piece of data from your scientific. You know, you've been in.
No data, only perception.
All right. No. But we had to get to Mr. McLuhan. But anyway, but the thing is that most of the species that have existed are extinct. The vast majority of species that have existed are extinct.
I don't think most of them are here at the moment.
No, I know, but you know,
they might become extinct if.
Do you think it may be that we're meant to become extinct?
I don't know what it means.
If
to
we
say
do
we're
ourselves
meant.
in, or yeah, okay, yeah.
No, I think that we certainly have the capacity to make a very miserable lot for our species if we don't handle our environment, our natural resources, the planet on which we live better than we are starting to handle it now.
I know Carl Whitfall. Did you ever know Carl Whitfall? He wrote on that despotism and power relationships between people came with agriculture, and you had to have the coerced labor of their work in Oriental despotism. He was a serious anthropologist, but the idea is hasn't it always been, just to go to political things or something, there's always been a small group of people who run things. You had emperors in Rome, you had the kings in England, and you've got certain people whose Periclean Greece was based upon slavery. And Aristotle said it would always be necessary for there to be slavery so the few can lead the life of the mind and the spirit, and that it would ever be so unless the loom learned to weave.
Well, he was wrong.
You think?
maybe the loom through the computer learned to weave, but we certainly do not live in slave societies.
You do not think we live in slave society?
No, I don't.
You don't think we have C. Wright Mills would have written about a power elite, that the assets are owned by a small group?
That's not slavery.
That's not slavery, chattel slavery, but
no, it's not. And it's not intellectual slavery either.
Okay.
I think there's a kernel of truth in that line of thinking, in that I think our other chief adaptive power is our social organization.
Yeah, right.
Which we share with other primates. Our social adaptation has become far more elaborate and complex, and in social situations, in social systems, people do have to make sacrifices of independence, although that is sort of an 18th century Enlightenment concept. In order to
socialization.
In order to gain the advantage of being a member of society.
Yeah, right.
Our schools tend, for better or for worse, to be socializing institutions.
Yeah.
The apprenticeship systems in Europe of the 15th, 16th, 17th, 18th century were socializing systems.
Yeah.
You could argue that religious iconography was a very powerful socializing message system that visually reinforced the order of society that church and state felt should apply to the running of human affairs.
Yeah.
So, yes, social systems can be confining, but they can also be liberating, as we see in this country and in Western European countries. They create wealth, as Aristotle said. They create looms that weave by themselves, which free people to live the life of the mind and to make knowledge in the human intellect the major sources of capital and progress.
Do you see that in the social organizing? I see people working 3 jobs in order to keep their nose above water. I see tendencies on the world. I see 80,000 demonstrations in China where you've got a capitalist-led communist party living in gated communities and going the traditional way of the aristocracy that owns everything. I saw an article by Paul Krugman in the New York Times the other day when he talked about wealth accumulation over the last 3 or 5 years. And he said the wealth, the real wealth above inflation, it didn't go even to the upper 5%. It didn't even go to the upper 1%. It didn't even go to the upper 1/10 of 1%. It went the upper 100th of 1% is where all the growth and wealth went. Concentration of wealth. There is a greater disparity of wealth between the well-to-do and the poor, or the citizenry in the United States, than there was in 1789 France.
I'm not sure that he's actually
That's what
right
some
about
of my
that.
Marxist friends tell me that.
Well,
now maybe I should recheck those figures, maybe, but
I think
it's
you should
possible.
recheck.
I mean, it's a much larger pie.
I think you should recheck the figures. It is, as we were saying earlier, it is a much larger pie.
Yeah.
The standard of living is historically, going back to the savannah.
Back to the sponge. 600 million years ago, you can go back to.
The sponges were probably pretty happy.
Yeah, well, maybe they did dance around a lot. Yeah.
The standard of living in America and Western Europe, increasingly in India and China, is rising. It may be producing a handful of extremely rich people. That may or may not,
set the pattern.
That may or may not be a good thing.
And that's okay. Maybe it should be that the finance capital
people
people set the templates that everybody else has to fall into line. The Marxists would take that line. They would say that there's some people, the real wealth is being created by the capital assets, the technologies embodied in capital assets, owned by a small class of people who have that thing. That is not democratically owned. We have some truncated ability to vote every once in a while.
Why should it be democratically owned?
Well, it's democracy. Why should every cell be able to have access to oxygen within a system without having to do whatever somebody who owns the capital assets tells them to do as a template in order to eat? I mean, liberation may be coming, which we haven't had. Mr. King used to say, "Let it ring down. Let my people go." You don't see liberation coming.
I guess I'm more of I guess I'm in some sense a conservative with a small c.
Okay.
One of the interesting features of American history, and perhaps the history of the Enlightenment, going back to the late 17th, early 18th century, is the separation of economic freedom from intellectual freedom.
Okay.
The Enlightenment promotes very strongly the ideal of intellectual freedom, and indeed Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations presupposes an absolute kind of economic freedom. And talking of seamlessness, economic activity requires a tremendous level of human creativity and energy. As a business person, I've had the thrill of starting a business enterprise, and with a small group of people working together to create a product that other people found useful, to put it on the market and have it succeed.
Yeah, that's great.
It's a fascinating process.
That's like Schumpeter's creative entrepreneurialism.
It's a very intellectual process, and it's also a very emotional process.
Right.
But somewhere in the 19th century, and as the 20th century evolved, economic freedom became separated from the intellectual freedom that's protected in the First Amendment.
Well, it was
it is not entirely. It's not entirely. I don't think it's entirely a good thing. Private enterprise takes quite a licking in our popular culture, although a lot of people want to get rich.
And that's still
the truth of the matter is that our economy is a tremendously powerful one that's creating a very high standard of living. There certainly are dark sides of it and abuses and problems. We sort of touched on the environment as an issue.
Yeah,
the
that's coming now. Yeah.
Global warming.
Yeah.
But that, to my mind, is a matter of tuning and correcting. It's not a condemnation of the system.
Oh, okay, that's interesting. Then it would be like fine tuning,
or maybe even crude tuning. But it's tuning. It's not it's not a matter of saying that the whole thing is a disaster. It doesn't work. We've got to start over. I think there
Like
are
that.
very good features. I mean, we live in a global economy now. And
global village, Mr. McLuhan.
Going to the global village,
Yeah.
and we do in large part because of the pervasiveness of modern communications and of the network computer,
Look
which
at that.
allows
Look what's going on. The computers are amazing.
allows the global economy to function. So
Yeah, well, that's progress. There's progress. It's obviously there. And we're in a situation, we just had an election here in this country which seemed to, in many people's minds, sort of right the situation where there had been a group of people who had a certain kind of view that maybe they're going to be able to be checked by a very politically astute group of people who formed this nation 230 years ago, which forms a model for the world in a sense. Mr. Fukuyama said in a sense that we've defeated the Soviet Union as the end of history. And at an ideological level, or the idea of social organization, the last man, the end of history, the last man, that we've come to an end of any kind of a question, and it's just a matter of just fine-tuning it, and the system's in place, led by the United States of America, hyperpower, it's in place, and that if we can just let that go, stay the course, that it will raise all ships. It'll raise all boats. And there's no question of qualitatively challenging the vision thing, that we need a vision that would allow for there to be some sort of an alteration in the way we form capital and the way we distribute income in order for there to be an involvement of all of humanity in a kind of way other than what the capitalist model that we've inherited. And if one more last thing, Mr. Nixon in 1972 said we're all Keynesians now, John Maynard Keynes, we're all Keynesians.
I think that's a good
What
statement.
are we now if we're not Keynesians? What is the economic theory about forming capital and informing that, forming capital and distributing income, and the capital is becoming more responsible for production through time as far as the ratio with labor. We distribute all income by labor criteria to the vast majority of the people. The capital is all owned by a small group of people. But what is the economic theory that informs the operation of this planet Earth now, the spaceship Earth, if it isn't Keynesian? What are we all now in terms of economic theory that informs the political process?
I think we're certainly Keynesians. I think we're Galbraithians.
Okay.
I think that to some extent we're Adam Smithians. Going back to the capital markets, the capital markets are a gigantic success story.
Okay.
Capital can move around the globe in a matter of seconds. There's nothing like the liquidity of the global economy is spectacular.
Absolutely.
It makes capital available instantaneously for any good idea that comes along, and a lot of bad ones. But then you have the market to sort those out. I mentioned Galbraith because in The Affluent Society, a book that I think people ought to go back and read again.
Okay.
He talks about the risk that corporations take when they make major investments in a product, such as a new airliner or a new pharmaceutical agent, and how the size of that capital allocation carries with it a risk that the corporation tries to minimize by marketing, advertising, to some extent interacting with government, all of which is aimed to stabilize and create a market to make much more certain a positive outcome.
Eliminate risk
for the investment. Eliminate
absolutely.
Risk. But there is again perhaps a dark side to that, which is that you are, albeit unconsciously, trying to control human behavior. We as consumers are constantly told
Use dial soap.
that we're not beautiful enough, or that we should be beautiful in a new way,
right,
or that we should drive a safer car.
Right.
These are all perfectly reasonable incentives to try to offer us.
Yeah.
But they are being offered also in the spirit of making our behavior more predictable for the marketer.
Right.
So I think
Branding,
Galbraith has a real insight
he was
into.
grand. He was grand. He passed just recently. It's too bad. His son's still doing good work down in Austin. You know, Jamie.
Wonderful man. Yeah.
Yeah, he was. He was great. We did a program with him at one time.
Did you?
Yeah, I was in his house, and we went to the lights, and we blew out every light in the house with a fuse. We had to go down to the basement with a candle, and his wife was so gracious. He was great. He was a gaunt ectomorph. He was a great guy.
And he had real insight into the behavior of industrial and post-industrial economies.
You know, one of the heck of it is there's not enough time, Jonathan. We've only got an hour. We're almost coming to the end of the hour, and we both had a great admiration. We're going to get the word in for Mr. McLuhan.
We must get the word in for Mr. McLuhan.
We only got about we're all down to soundbite time, unfortunately.
The
but
global village.
Yeah, right.
Which he saw has a diffusion of American culture through radio, television, high-speed presses, the communications infrastructure of modern society.
Yeah.
The one thing he overlooked, which I think is quite fascinating, is the central role that the computer plays in that whole process, in that whole technology.
Yeah.
He in understanding media, he says that the computer is basically a fancy calculator for making high-speed financial decisions and marketing decisions.
It's a quantitative.
He didn't see the power of the network computer as a device for creating knowledge and disseminating knowledge.
Right. It's just coming in exponential proportions. We could go on talking.
Well, that's my soundbite on that.
Yeah, that's your sound. Well, it was a good one. Anyway, the haiku. You know, it was a really good soundbite. Thank you. I'm sorry we ran out of time.
Thank you.
At the beginning, we ought to do some more. We could discuss this more. And you got a program here in M&M. Give it quick while we run the credits, if you would. When does it air and that kind of thing? And what is it involved with?
We do. My wife and I do two shows.
He's an independent producer here at M&M, ladies and gentlemen. M&M's getting richer and richer in its content. Yes.
My wife and I produce CB8 Speaks, the monthly cable cast of Community Board 8 Manhattan.
Good. That's uptown east?
That's the east side and Roosevelt Island. And she and I also produce a show called Hello the Show, which is like your show, a series of interviews with interesting people in the arts and sciences.
Wonderful. When does that air? Let them know quick. Okay.
That's on the second Monday of each month, and the Community Board program is, I think, the third Tuesday of each
Wonderful.
month.
And you're an independent television producer and streaming everywhere in the world in the global village that Mr. McLuhan talked about. We only got a chance. We have to do more, okay, at some point.
Love to.
I'd love to do that. Your pleasure at the perception. Jonathan Piel, we could have gone on for hours and hours and hours, and I thank you very much for all of for participating and for your very well-led life up to now that continues in a very gratiating manner for the human society.
Well, thank you, Harold. It was really great. I enjoyed being on your show.
My great
Really
good
fun.
pleasure. Your
Great.
pleasure to have this perception invite you to tune in.